Shalom Aleichem, Yosef Eliyah here, Omed Yeshar. Today I heard a good portion of I guess you could call it a debate between Rabbi Moshe Otero and this guy. Well, the video's not up yet. Michael Brown. He's a major messianic leader and apologist. So I wish I could have somehow been able to participate in the dialogue, but obviously that would just be even more confusing than it was. But some good points were made, and on both sides, I guess you could say. Not that I agree with both sides, but came across as though both sides got some good merit in their favor. Some of the things that Michael Brown suggested in reaction to Rav Moshe Otero are things that I want to touch on in this session. So that mainly has to do with the position and purpose and authority of the prophets of Israel, or any prophet following Moshe Rabbenu, Moses, and also the position, purpose, and authority of what is known as Midrash or Agadata. Now, this was put on my mind in that one of the distinguishing factors that Rav Moshe Otero was referring to in regard to himself, in contrast to many leaders in so-called ultra-Orthodox Judaism, what are known as black hats or Haredim, is that he does not support the idea that one should only expose himself or read things which have a kosher certification. That's right, not only food is required, not only food requires kosher certification, but with many in so-called ultra-Orthodox Judaism, even books and reading material and videos require such certification, and it's a bit outlandish if you ask me. I understand their intention for spiritual purity and whatnot, but it seems to me just to be digging themselves into a hole to to avoid reality in the world that they live in. So when Rav Moshe Otero mentioned this distinguishing factor about himself, then Michael Brown correctly referred to a passage in Mishnah Sanhedrin. It's also brought in the Talmud, but of course the Mishnah comes before the Talmud. A teaching of Rabbi Akiva that anyone who reads in the books of the heresy of the heretical individuals, whoever reads heretical books, that they have no place in the world to come. And then it is explained in the Talmud that this is in reference to the books of the Tzedokim, the books of the Sadducees. Now there's definitely indication that this may very well not have been the original wording of the Talmud in explanation to that Mishnah, but that the Talmud actually stated Sifrei HaMinim instead of Sifrei HaTzidokim. If it's Sifrei HaMinim, then it's more broad. Sifrei HaMinim simply means sectarians, the books of the sectarians. Sectarians being Minim. The word min in Hebrew simply means like a sect or a type of something, but in religious or ideological context, it's Minim means sects, whereas Tzidokim is a specific sect. And there is no explicit indication that this is in reference to Christian writings, early Christian writings specifically, though it may include Christian writings. But the point that I want to convey here is that this Mishnaic prohibition against reading heretical books, Sfarim Chitzoniim, external books, is not a broad prohibition against reading any kind of material outside of that material in the rabbinic tradition. The Talmud, as I've already indicated, the Talmud itself already explains that that is not the intention, limiting it to sectarian books. So non-sectarian but non-religious books, such as history or science, are not necessarily included in the prohibition. And this is exactly how the Meiri, one of the major Talmudic commentators, explains. He explains that Rabbi Akiva's reference to the external books is only in reference to books which are to convey how to follow in the ways of these sectarian practices, how to live in accordance with their beliefs and so forth, but is not in reference to books that do not deal with such religious context. I also found that in the Yerushalmi, which is also comes after the Mishnah, but is earlier than the Talmud Bavli, older than the Babylonian Talmud, that this particular Talmud, the Talmud Yerushalmi, it actually explicitly permits the reading of such books as Homer and other secular type writings. So that is clear enough, and I think that's enough to answer Michael Brown, who was not necessarily disagreeing with Rav Moshe Otero that we should not limit ourselves in what we would read and study, but it is to clarify the matter. There is a prohibition within Torah Judaism against reading or delving into certain types of texts, but that prohibition is not a broad prohibition which restricts reading of all material. It only restricts reading of material that is for the instruction of religious practice that is sectarian and contrary to Torah Judaism. This is brought also in Mishneh Torah. You can find it in the laws of idolatry, Hilchot Avodah Zarah, in the second chapter, the third halakha. There the Rambam writes that the idolaters composed many texts concerning their service, regarding what the essence of their service is and how these practices, what they involve and what the laws of their practices are. And the Rambam understands this prohibition not as originating from Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah, but rather as originating from God Himself. Certainly the Rambam, you will see if you look it up in Hilchot Avodah Zarah, the laws of idolatry, chapter 2, you will see that the Rambam is not saying that God prohibited a specific group of texts, but he holds that this prohibition is straight from God with regard to any text or any context that will lead us contrary to upholding God's commandments. This is derived from Leviticus chapter 19 verse 4, where we are commanded not to turn to idolatrous gods. And with regard to that, the sages of Israel understood that it is with regard to this that God commands us to be careful lest we seek out regarding the other gods, saying, how do these idolaters serve their gods? Likewise, this is understood to be what it means in the third section of Kriyat Shema that we recite, required to recite at least twice a day, where we are commanded not to stray after our eyes or the contemplations of our hearts. So there, that is in reference both to foreign religious practices that are not even necessarily religious, any practice that is contrary to keeping God's commandments, which would ultimately lead us to abandon the God of Israel and go after false gods. Back to the discussion between Rabbi Moshe Otero and Michael Brown, I think it's important to clarify, as I mentioned earlier, the position of Midrashic texts and agadata. So I will give you a few indications, a few quotations from our early sages as to the position and purpose of the agadata and their level of authority. This is important to know because Christians, and especially Messianics, draw a lot of their arguments from such texts as the Midrash and agadata. So you must know what level of authority they have. Likewise, there are many spurious views popular among Jews who, for all intents and all purposes, seem to be quite Torah observant, but whose opinions with regard to some fundamental matters are fairly skewed. They likewise base a substantial amount of their beliefs on their own understandings or misunderstandings of agadata and Midrash. So let us begin with Shmuel haNagid. He lived in the late 900s to the mid 1000s. He writes you can find this in the booklet. I first ran across this in the booklet published by Feldheim Publishers called Aiding Talmud Study by Aryeh Carmell. So here it has a portion of that booklet called Aiding Talmud Study, where they bring Shmuel haNagid's writing introduction to Talmudic study. So there he's explaining what is aggadah, okay, in Aramaic agadata. He writes, everything mentioned in the Gemara, everything mentioned in the Talmud, which is not directly connected with the halakhic aspect of the commandment. That means anything that is mentioned in the Gemara or the Talmud which is not directly connected to how we implement the commandments of God, one should learn from such statements only those things which our minds can grasp. And it is important to know that all matters which our sages established as law in connection with the commandment transmitted by Moses, our teacher, who received it from the Almighty, those matters with regard to law cannot be augmented or diminished in any way. See Deuteronomy chapter 17 verse 8 through 11. That I insert there in the quote. Now he continues this early authority in Jewish law. He continues, in contrast to those legal matters that are contained in the Talmud, which cannot be augmented or diminished, in contrast to them, however, the aggadic explanations they rendered of biblical verses were in accordance with their individual views and ideas which occurred to them, meaning they were not given to Moses by God at Mount Sinai, as many ignorant Jews seem to believe and spread this belief about. He continues, we should learn from them the agadata, insofar as our minds can grasp them, but otherwise we should not build upon them. And this is exactly the problem that we run into both with Christians and especially Messianics and those who are too deeply engrossed in mystical teachings. Now I will continue with what the Rambam writes regarding this in his commentary to the Mishnah, to Seder Nashim in Sanhedrin chapter 10. You can find this, I'm sorry, but this is going to be in Hebrew. What I'm reading is my own translation of it, but you can find it in Rabbi Kaphach's translation from the original Arabic on page Kuf Mim He. That's page 145 of his translation. So there the Rambam Maimonides writes in comment Gimel, and the third comment, we have already mentioned to you a number of times that all disagreements that are between the sages, the Hachamim, and that are not things with regard that actions depend upon, rather they are only establishing opinions, right? That there is no place to arrive at a legal conclusion or decision, yifsok halakha, in practical Jewish law according to any one of them. The Rambam couldn't be any more clear. Again, I will read. We've already mentioned to you a number of times that all the disagreements that are between the sages and the Talmudic literature that are not disagreements with regard to how to implement the commandments, so disagreements that are not with regard to how you do the commandments, but rather they are disagreements on non-legal issues. They establish opinion alone, opinion, not from God at Moses, not from God to Moses and Mount Sinai, but they are opinion, just as Rabbi Shmuel haNagid had mentioned, they are the matters that occurred to those individual rabbis. They are not binding rulings within the context of the Sanhedrin, but are the opinion of individual rabbis. So while we may have respect for them, they are not binding. You are not required to believe them. They do not have authority in and of themselves. So the Rambam continues, therefore there is no place to arrive at a legal decision in halakha according to any of them. Okay, so now we will also see, in case perhaps the Rambam is just being misunderstood there, we will see how his son understood it. The son of the Rambam, Rabbi Avraham ben Harambam, he writes in his introduction to Aggada. You can find this in Yaakov. And Yaakov is a collection of the non-legal parts of the Talmud. All right, his introduction to the Aggada. This particular translation is from Rabbi Jacob ibn Habib. I'm presuming that the Rambam's son originally wrote this in Arabic. So here's translated to English by Rabbi S.H. Greek. Here is the quote: "And think not like those who do not grasp the real truth, that every simple darash or homiletic explanation of the Bible. Do not think like those who do not grasp the real truth, that every single such teaching or so-called allegorical explanation of the passage uttered by the sages was handed over by tradition, as is the case with the principal parts of the Torah. Because the fact is otherwise, that the explanation of such passages which do not involve either a dogma of religious principle or any law of the Torah, it has no traditional bearing, but was explained by the authors merely according to their own personal knowledge and feeling." And he continues, the son of the Rambam, "And many of them are used merely as figures of speech in a poetical style, or are explained in that poetical form. Thus I have no doubt that when Rabbi Yehoshua and the part of the Talmud called Zevahim, when he, regarding the sentence, and Jethro heard, regarding the sentence in the Bible in Exodus chapter 18, where Rabbi Yehoshua in the Talmud elaborates upon this biblical passage where it says Jethro heard, that Rabbi Yehoshua explained, what did he hear? Rabbi Yehoshua says he heard the war of Amalek. So the son of the Rambam then writes that with regard to what Rabbi Yehoshua in the Talmud said, son of the Rambam writes, this is merely an opinion, not a tradition, and is bringing of evidence to support his opinion proves that it is so. Meaning, by the fact that Rabbi Yehoshua is bringing evidence to support his opinion, proves that it's his opinion and not something that was passed along by Moses, from Moses, onto the Jewish people. For in a tradition we need no evidence, the son of the Rambam writes. Furthermore, the fact that all other sages differed with him on this explanation proves this so. An additional quote that I didn't have time to look up, but I know for a fact is there, is in the Ramban's dispute with the Catholic Church officials at his time. That's the Ramban with an N at the end, Nachmanides, as opposed to Maimonides. There, the church authorities refer, as many Messianic leaders do today, refer to something taught in Jewish Midrashic literature, and the Ramban writes that these are the opinions of individuals, and our faith is not to be established upon these teachings. The reason why, an additional reason why, it is so important to keep this in mind, even though it may offend the deeply held beliefs of some Jews, to my own pain, that it is such a foundation for some Jews of their faith. But an additional reason why it is so important to know these distinctions is because presenting these ideas that every opinion in the Talmud and every non-legal statement is given by God to Moses on Mount Sinai and then orally transmitted, simply fuels the fire of both anti-Semitism and also of anti-Talmudicism from the part of secular Jews and Karaites, who use this type of mindset and belief to justify their view that Talmudic Judaism is stupid, preposterous, irrational, and idiotic. And the truth, I must say, I would thoroughly agree with them that it is idiotic, stupid, and irrational. It's not even childish. If it weren't for the fact that I know, as I've quoted to you from these leading rabbis of Jewish tradition, early leading rabbis, I would agree with the Karaites and the critics if it weren't that I know from these individuals and from indications in the Talmudic literature itself that this approach is not the approach endorsed by the Talmud or by our greatest rabbis, but rather, as the son of the Rambam correctly exposed, it is the opinion of the ignorant ones among the Jewish people, and it is also such people as this, such as I forget his exact name, Shlomo, Solomon something, in the area of Provence in northern Spain, such people as this, who brought about the burning of hundreds of Talmudic texts, because when, in that particular case, this particular rabbi in Provence in northern northern Spain, when he heard of the Rambam speaking out against belief in corporalism, belief that God has a physical body, this particular rabbi was so offended due to basing his faith to such an extent on Midrash and agadata. He was so offended by the Rambam speaking out against God being physical, because he had established his faith on Midrash and agadata, which uses so much anthropomorphism and metaphor. And of course, as the ignorant often do, he took them all at point blank as literal, although Jewish tradition has held continuously that on the whole, in general, these are figures of speech, not to be taken literally. It is a funny coincidence that while both Jews and Christians acknowledge the authority of the biblical texts, that our approaches can lead to such divergent views, and this is ultimately because Christians, unlike Jews, take those parts of the Bible that are clearly intended to be understood at point blank, literally. Christians tend to take them metaphorically, therefore justifying not doing the commandments because they're metaphor at the end of the day, no longer applicable except for metaphorical reasons, whereas they take the metaphors of the Bible literally. And in the traditional Jewish approach is to take that which is clearly indicated as being literal, to take it at face value and understand that it is as it says. And those places that are metaphorical and are not to be understood at face value, such as just in the same manner that God is called a rock in the Bible, yet God forbid that we actually think he is a rock. So likewise, when it clearly states that in a vision or in a dream God appeared as a man, we know that this is metaphorical, because God also appears as, for example, is described as, in the book of Psalms, as having wings and feathers. And we also know, as God has already made clear to us, that in the revelation at Mount Sinai, the people of Israel saw no form nor image, but only the fire and the speech coming forth. And we know, despite that the revelation of God and the fire is called God, we know that this fire is not God, because otherwise we would have actually seen an image, as fire is a visible thing. And also God relates in the book of Deuteronomy that we did not see any form, neither masculine nor feminine, neither male nor female. Therefore we know that when they had visions of God, that this was not literally him, because the vision was masculine. So unless one wants to believe that God contradicts himself and thinks that we're absolute fools, one must conclude that these places are understood to be metaphorical. I also liked in the debate, I was so proud that Rabbi Moshe Otero, in his going back to the symbolism found in the Passover lamb that Christians so beloved due to the symbolism in the New Testament between Christ and the lamb, that Moshe Otero emphasized within the context of the Bible, in the context of the book of Genesis and Exodus, the lamb is considered a god among the Egyptians, and that it was within that context that God commanded the people of Israel to slaughter the lamb, which was clearly a great dishonor and blasphemy in the eyes of the Egyptians, which gives all the more meaning and significance to the killing of the lamb at that first Passover, especially in the very midst of Egypt, in the eyes of all the Egyptians. It's within that context that it becomes abundantly clear that it is far more reasonable to understand that the symbolism in the Passover lamb is a symbolism of the faithful who trust in God, showing their trust in God over their fear of the worshippers of the lamb god in Egypt at that time, showing that they are exhibiting full abandonment of the idolatry of Egypt and full faith and surrender to the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Additionally, Moshe Otero correctly quoted the book of Jeremiah, where it is said that cursed is the man who trusts in man and makes flesh his arm. And I believe this was totally pertinent to the discussion between Moshe Otero and Michael Brown. And though Michael Brown just sort of let that verse go by, changing the topic, it is extremely pertinent, because I can understand in the eye of a Christian, in the mind of a Christian, that they will say this verse doesn't really apply to our belief in Jesus, despite that we believe he is God in physical form, because we believe he's God. And the book of Jeremiah is saying, "Cursed is man who trusts in man." But such a rebuttal ignores the fundamental principle of Christianity, the principle of the incarnation, which teaches that Jesus is not only God, but he's also a man. He's not God to the detriment of his being a man, but rather the traditional and widely held view of the incarnation in Christianity is that Jesus was 100% God and 100% man. And in the words of Jeremiah the prophet, "Cursed is the man who trusts in man and makes flesh his arm." And it is specifically in the flesh and blood of Jesus, in the blood, which is a part of the flesh, it is specifically in this that the Christians trust and rely for their salvation. So I thought that was a very powerful point that he made, which was basically ignored or not deflected. I gotta speak English more often. Casted aside in the debate. I think now we can go on and talk about some the laws of prayer. As we left off 2 weeks ago, we had Hanukkah and we had a fast. Now we have time to continue and return to the learning of the laws of prayer. Let's see what you guys have written so far. Hey Shay, I was about to sign into Yahoo and try to get you. Shalom, Boo and Shai and Ari. Alright. I never know when to come anymore. I need a schedule. God appeared in a pillar of fire and a cloud and a burning bush. Were they to be taken literally? So the pillar of fire and the cloud and the burning bush, you can understand as being visible manifestations of God. I don't know that they were necessarily visible, but to all indication, I really think that at least the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire were visible. And you see also that they're referred to as God, okay? That it is the God of Israel, okay? But if you look in the context, you will see that it is God, it is the God of Israel in the sense that Oh, I just went blank. What is that? You guys still with me? Wafa, yes. Aggada and agadata are the same. One is Hebrew and one is from Aramaic. Is it just me, or do you all also see like some kind of commercial in the video stream? Yeah, it looks like I disappeared, but now I see myself again. Anyway, so getting back to the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire, I've written about this on my website. I'm of the opinion that at least the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire were visible manifestations of God's presence. It seems pretty clear in the text that it is said that God is with the people of Israel, and that and that God is in the cloud or with the cloud. You can understand the prefix in Hebrew ba as being with or in or at. The cloud and the pillar of fire also seem to represent the presence of God, but I think it is a stretch to believe that God is actually a pillar of fire or a pillar of cloud, and that is confirmed both, as I said before using logic, that if this were literally God and not merely an expression of His providence over the situation, an expression of His sovereignty, if it were not merely an expression but were actually Him, God forbid, then it would be meaningless where it says in the book of Deuteronomy that they beheld no image of God. Haran. And also you find in the book of the prophet Isaiah, where the prophet there explicitly refers to the cloud and the fire as being created. So that kind of leaves it to the idiots to believe. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be so strong. To the unaware. Alright, let's go to the laws of prayer. Where is the book? Oh wow. Just a moment. Right here. So yeah, you're a little bit late, J. Kreter. But now we are just going to begin the laws of prayer in the Mishneh Torah. I believe we're towards the end of the 3rd chapter. If anybody has a link to where Chabad has the text for these laws, could you please post it? Okay. Wafa, you have a question? Sure, ask your question, please. Hello? Thank you very much. Thank you, Sarah. Wafa, what was your question? Yes. Aggada and aggada are the same. One is Hebrew and one is Aramaic. And the essential difference between that and Midrash is that usually when we refer to agadata, we are referring to the non-legal portions of the Talmudic literature within the Talmud, Talmud Bavli or Talmud Yerushalmi, the Jerusalem Talmud or the Babylonian Talmud. Whereas Midrash is basically the same kind of concept, but not within the body of the Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud or the Babylonian Talmud. Rather, when we say Midrash, it is basically the same concept within its own book. I hope that made sense. So basically, Agadata is like Midrash within the Talmud. And Midrash is basically agadata outside of the Talmud in its own compiled text. There is legal Midrash, such as Mechilta, but usually when people refer to Midrash, they're not referring to that. They're referring to non-legal texts, which, as in accordance with the quotes that I gave earlier, they are non-authoritative with regard to how we are to live our lives or even what we are to believe, but rather they're to give us insights and cause us to think and to learn more deeply from different parts of the Bible with the insightful questions or suggestions of the authors of the Midrash. But this does not mean that you are a heretic or a non-believer for disagreeing with any of the suggestions that are contained in the Midrash or the agadata. What's AD? What's an AD? An ad? Oh. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and start reading. If anybody has any questions, please post them, and Hashem, God's help, I will periodically look up and see if the question has been posted. Ari asks, does anyone know the answer to this question? Can any Jew living today prove his or her tribal lineage? Yeah, the Levites can, especially among the Kohanim. I know a family that has, name by name, traced their lineage all the way back to biblical times, and from that they are able to trace back to Aaron, the brother of Moses. They have it in writing. But it should be known that lineage or tribal lineage is not that important outside of where one is to inherit land in the land of Israel, which is not so practical at this moment. The Rambam writes that these things will be clarified through prophecy. Prophecy, and the office of a prophet, is not an office which is intended to institute laws and new ways to apply Torah law to new situations. That is the function of the Beit Din Gadol, the Great Sanhedrin. But the office of a prophet can be used to find things which were lost, things which are already, we already know what the law is, but we don't know where a certain needed utensil is or anything of the sort in order to carry out the already known law. So it's within that context that with prophecy the identity of the tribes will be restored, in the opinion of the Rambam, probably other opinions, but there's not so much significance. I think one of the main reasons that the land of Israel was divided into inheritances for the 12 tribes is, one, because at that time they knew who the tribes were, and you need subdivisions of peoples in order to properly regulate a government and a land with officers and police and courts, and that's a very practical way to do so, just as we have even in America. And of course those who are without any kind of lineage are able to join where they want, and when they join and live in the land assigned to the tribe of Gad, for example, or Reuben, then they fall under the auspices of those courts. The actual lineage itself is not central to the Torah, except for within the context of a Kohen serving in the temple and a continual dynasty of kings, which is only permitted to be from the tribe of Judah. We can have a king not from the tribe of Judah, but dynasties of kings are only to be within the tribe of Judah. Alright, the laws of prayer, chapter, let's see, Let's go to chapter 3, the 8th law. It says, كل مي عبارة على زمان تفيلا ولا يتبلل. Anyone who did not pray the prayer, one of the assigned prayers, and the time for that prayer passed, then if he did this high-handedly, if he did it intentionally, that he let the time for prayer pass and he didn't pray on purpose, then there is no rectification, and he cannot make up for that prayer at a later time. If he did it by mistake, if he was prevented from praying due to something against his will, or simply forgot haphazardly and did not pray before the time passed, but he did not do so on purpose, alright, so in that case, that he by accident or due to something against his will was not able to pray in the time of prayer, then he's able to make up for that prayer that he didn't pray at the following prayer time. So when you missed a prayer on accident or due to circumstances beyond your control, and you want to make up that prayer, then you pray the make-up version of the prayer in the next prayer time, the prayer time for the next prayer of the day. First you pray the prayer that belongs to that time of the day, and after you pray to that prayer, then you can pray an additional prayer to make up for the prayer that was not prayed earlier. Did everybody understand? Okay. Careful. And how is this done? What is implied? If he made a mistake and didn't pray the morning prayer until the middle point of the day passed, in that case he will pray the afternoon prayer twice. The first of those two prayers in the afternoon he will pray to fulfill his obligation to pray the afternoon prayer. And the second prayer that he will pray in the afternoon will be to make up for the morning prayer that he did not pray. If he made a mistake and if he erred and did not pray the afternoon prayer until the sun set, that he prays the evening prayer twice. The first of the evening prayer he prays as arvi, as the evening prayer, and the second one and the second one he prays in the evening will be to make up for the afternoon prayer that he didn't pray earlier in the day. If he erred and he didn't pray the evening prayer until the pillar of dawn arose, this is the first bit of light, beam of light that arises from the horizon before sunset. So if he waited up until this point in time and he didn't pray the evening prayer though he wanted to, as we know already from several occurrences and we'll also see again later, the evening prayer of the Shemoneh Esrei is not obligatory, but has been voluntarily accepted as though it is obligatory among the Jewish people. So if he wants to make up that prayer and he erred in not praying, then he can still make it up by praying the morning prayer twice. What he will do is he will make it up in the morning. The first of the morning prayer he will pray to fulfill that day's morning prayer. And the second one will be to make up the evening prayer that he missed. Alright, so if he erred and he didn't pray neither that prayer nor the prayer which immediately preceded it, so if he has two prayers in a row that he erred by not praying, then he is not able to make up for both of them. He can only make up for the most recent one that he missed. How? What is implied by this? If he mistakenly did not pray neither the morning prayer nor the afternoon prayer. He will still pray the evening prayer only twice. And the second time when he prays the evening prayer, the second version of the evening prayer that he will pray, is going to be in order to make up the afternoon prayer that he missed. It cannot make up the morning prayer that he missed. For the morning prayer, it cannot be made up. For its entire day has already passed. And likewise for all the other prayers. If he had before him two prayers, if he had before himself two prayers, one the afternoon prayer and the other the additional prayer, which is parallel to the additional sacrifice that is made on biblical holidays and on Sabbaths and new moons, this additional prayer, which is parallel to those additional sacrifices, is called musaf, which itself means additional or addition. So if he had before him two prayers, one is the afternoon prayer and one is the additional prayer that is special to special days, so when he has those two in front of him, he is within the time period of the day where he can pray either of those. What he does is he prays the afternoon prayer first, and after that he prays the special additional prayer which is pertinent uniquely to that day. And there are those among the early authorities of Jewish law that one should not do this in a congregation, in a quorum of 10 or more kosher adult Jewish males, in order not to cause the congregation to err. Now we've made it to the 4th chapter. Keep reading or cut it? Alright. So that's all for it. We stopped at a good place. We will pick up next week, Be'ezrat Hashem, with God's help, and chapter 4 in the laws of prayer. All the best. Shabbat Shalom. Shalom, y'all.